All right, we're going to get going. I just want to quickly introduce Werner Morowitz, who is our board chair and who has a perfect background for working with the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience and helping to lead us in our work, because Werner mixes a background of research and being a faculty member at the University of Washington, working on oceans physics, to becoming a hedge fund investor for 10 years here at Sun Valley Gold. And so combining his environmental passion and expertise with his investment strategy, we're very grateful that Werner has joined our board and become such an active leader in our work on resilience. Thank you, Werner.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you all for showing interest and attending our session. You know, the first panel, well, first of all, Senator Booker is very hard to follow, and I hope you all had a chance to appreciate that. The second panel, I think, talking about the importance of resilience is really critical, and some of the speakers alluded to it, in terms of the importance of bringing people together to understand why we're doing what we're doing, why is it important, and really the social effect of needing everyone to want to collaborate, to want to cooperate in the process. You know, it was interesting hearing Jeff talk and say, you know, I'm not an environmentalist, and kind of giving that caveat. On the investment side, my guess is Jeff is an innovator and would want to be an innovator. And that's the way I think of it in terms of this investment panel. This is not really about environmentalism. It's about innovation. And that's, I think, something that you know, we all, it's hard to imagine anyone is really against innovation. As Amy mentioned, I came to this this perspective having worked in academia for 12 years, first part of my life. And there was aspects of academia that I loved in terms of extending boundaries, rigorous science, a solid understanding of the scientific issues, certainly with the environment, that's important. Creativity, and what did I say? Can you guys hear me? Okay. Just you can take cool. So we have. I think that those qualities are very important to include in our institute's work, and we're fortunate enough to have very strong academic partners, I think, that will certainly contribute those qualities. But the part that led me to leave and to do something different for myself was that the end goal of a lot of that research was to publish in the preeminent journals, scientific journals of the day, journals like Journal of Physical Oceanography, Journal of Geophysical Research, all journals which I'm sure you're all subscribed to and read on a regular basis. But it made me recognize to really have an impact, that's probably not the best way to do it. And so I became interested in markets, and I had the opportunity to come here 13 years ago and work for an outstanding hedge fund affiliated with Tiger Management in New York, and started out doing quantitative analysis, and then moving on to other aspects, risk management, portfolio management. And so I think that experience of coming to grips with the markets, seeing how the markets work, seeing how if you have a good idea that makes sense, not just environmentally but economically, that you can enact change very rapidly, much more rapidly, I think. As Senator Booker was alluding to, I don't think government's going to lead this process, but I think the market can. And I don't think the market's at odds necessarily with the types of issues of resilience that we're talking about. I want to say just a couple other words too. The power of the markets, the other aspect of the markets that I think is very important, just as I was talking about the attributes of academia, is that the markets impose discipline, and they also impose measurement. When you're in the public markets, it's pretty clear whether you're winning or losing. It's in your face every day. And that discipline, and I think that transparency and that measurability is very important for this type of work as well. So I think there's attributes on both sides that are important. I mentioned resilience as just another form of innovation, and I'm hearing kind of the opposite of resilience being fragility, which I think is a great way to think about it. But I think there's also resilient investments that you may not think about as being resilient. I think of more efficient resource utilization, things like Zipcar, or what was the other one, Car Hopper. Basically the idea being that we have assets, in this case cars, that are not always being used. So rather than buying new cars, how can we utilize what we have more efficiently? And I think that is, those are very high growth areas. They're utilizing things that people have alluded to in the past in terms of new technologies, changing economics in terms of how we value resources, how we value the externalities associated with resources. So I think all those things, our world is changing. And so that's why I come back to kind of the key driver as really being innovation. This is about innovation. It's not necessarily about environmentalism, although that's certainly a great benefit. It's not necessarily about social development, although that's a great benefit. It's about innovating and growing. A key aspect of resilience also is diversity. And I thought it was very impressive with the first panel, how diverse that panel was. We need to have conflicting views. We need to reach consensus. We need to try to incorporate everybody into this debate. And I think this panel also is reflective of that diversity. We have people here, Brooks, who's working on the global level, who's working with public, applying public funds, government funds, in public-private partnerships, working with countries, or working in areas all around the world on a global basis, emerging markets. They've deployed over $4 billion in that effort. We have corporate, large corporations here. We've got SolarCity and NRG, who you've heard from. NRG, one of the largest energy providers in the United States. SolarCity has done more solar deployments than any other company in the country. So, these are big players, and we also have Philanthropy Northwest operating on the regional scale. So, getting a little bit narrower, working in the Northwest, and also tapping into different pools of capital in terms of philanthropic capital. And we have Michael here, who is focused on local investment. How can we, what are the benefits of local investment, of which there are many, and how do we enable all forms of capital, not just high net worth, not just highly accredited investors, but also everyone in the community, which I think is very consistent with the ideas of resiliency. And we have Jennifer with Caprock in terms of maybe operating on a regional scale in terms of client base, although maybe that's arguable, but certainly investing on a global basis. So the combination of working on a variety of scales here, from global down to local, and also working on a diverse set of pools of capital, trying to incorporate all the different interests and benefits and opportunity that these different pools of capital can provide, be it public, be it nonprofit, be it private, be it small, local people. So with that said, I'd like to start with Brooks from a global perspective. And really the questions, I guess, to address here are, what have you learned? We are an institute that is, trying to do this on the local scale, but make it relevant on a larger scale. The other thing I should add is that we're so fortunate in the sense that 3 of these panelists have direct affiliation with the Institute. So Brooks is literally wed to the Institute through his wife, Lila, who's a board member, whether he likes it or not. And Michael is on the advisory board, and Joe is on the advisory board as well. And we're actively collaborating with...
Brooks is on the advisory board too, so you know. I recruited the whole family.
Oh, good, okay. Okay, good. I thought the wedding bond was enough, but I'm glad it's... and then we're actively collaborating with Pacific Northwest in terms of how to mobilize capital for some of the things we want to do. And we're grateful to have the participation of SolarCity and Jennifer. So these we have these connections in place, and it's essential for us to do this at a very high level, at a level that's world class, and we're dependent on having partners like this. So Brooks, I think what you've learned from operating in all areas of the world in terms of what's worked, what hasn't worked, what you see in terms of opportunity. Maybe start there.
I'm both wedded to the organization and got wed here too. So we love being here. So I work with OPIC. OPIC is not an oil cartel. It's the Overseas Private Investment Corporation of the U.S. government, which is the development bank of the U.S. government. All G7 countries, in fact, most industrialized countries, have a development finance bank. And our work is to do sustainable development around the world. We have to do four things in our investments. One is we are a foreign policy tool. We project U.S. interests in the markets that we operate in, and we're open in 160 different emerging markets around the world. The second thing is that we do sustainable development. So all the projects that we do, and the portfolio is $18 billion worth of investments in over 100 countries right now, have a sustainability and development angle to them. The third thing that we have to do is mobilize commercial capital alongside us. And I'm going to correct one thing you said, actually, Werner, which is that we don't invest public money, your taxpayer money. We actually, for the investments that my group does, we go to Wall Street and we say, who wants to fund Kenya's first wind farm? And Wall Street says, are you kidding? Kenya, I don't know. Wind farms, I haven't studied, and I don't know this manager. And we say, that's okay. We're going to provide a U.S. government guarantee on this $20 million, essentially bond that we're offering. And they say, okay, well, if that's the case, and it's a 5-year T-bill with a little bit of premium, I'll do that. And then we take that money and we lend it to the people building the first wind farm in Kenya. And then in the process, we make that loan, we have a spread, and then OPIC actually returns between a quarter and $500 million in profits back to you. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but so we're a profitable bank. So those are the four things we do. We do foreign policy, we do development, we mobilize commercial capital, and we make money. We're a self-sustaining institution. Now, I want to pick up on something you said as well earlier, which was, about 15 years ago, I decided that the strongest social force on the planet, stronger than religion, stronger than language, stronger than geography, family, nationality, was capitalism. It changes the shape of the planet, literally the planet, faster and more more quickly and more inexorably than pretty much any other force that I can think of. And so that was what led me to say, okay, how can we harness capitalism for good? And that's essentially what OPIC does, and lots of other institutions as well. And so how are we doing that with, let's just take the wind farm in Kenya, for example. If you wanted to build a wind farm in Kenya, you could potentially figure out how much the price of energy would be once you got the thing built. You could put your measurement mast up there and figure out how much wind there is going to be. But how are you going to figure out how much it costs to move a 100-foot blade from the port of Mombasa up to the hills of Arusha to actually build this thing? No one's ever done it before. It involves a lot of risk. What OPIC does is help take that risk first, along with a few other investors that are up for that. And we do that over and over and over again. And we hope, in every case, that once we've done it, 2 or 3 times in various markets, that the rest of the capital base, investors from all over the world, the U.S. being the largest source of capital in the world, can then follow. And that's what it's happened in Chile. Of course, I'll throw a solar example in. We funded the first 3 solar farms, industrial solar farms in Chile. because the local banks were like 15-year loan. We don't do that. And we said, well, we do that. So we funded the first 3. And in the 4th, the local bank came in and took half of it. I don't think we're going to do a 5th. I think local capital now understands that this is a profitable enterprise and worth doing. And so to sort of bring it back to the Institute here, what we need to realize is that capitalism is never in scarce supply for a good idea. In fact, good ideas attract bubbles, and we know the impact of that. Capitalism is not scarce. It's the good ideas and it's the entrepreneurs and the smart people behind them that are really scarce. And so if we can find both the sources of those good ideas and that early risk capital that's willing to demonstrate, then what we can achieve over time, not only long-term sustainability, but financial sustainability. Because once the money starts to flow to these good ideas, as we heard from the last panel, it's going to snowball. And that's sort of what we do in 100 emerging markets around the world, and there's no reason why we can't achieve that here in the Valley.
Are there any particular areas in the globe, particular countries that you feel are...
Here,
Sorry, yeah. Areas that you've worked at that are further along in this, or that they're best practices that they're drawing on that you think we could incorporate?
It's a tricky question because the countries that attract us the most are the ones that are the least far along, right? I mean, we're funding solar for people who need the light to keep their shop on an extra 2 hours because there's no electricity, 50 miles around. But once they do have that first panel and the light, then they realize they can actually sell a cell phone charge as well. They've got a whole different line of business now. They make money. They buy another panel. They can buy a refrigerator now. They can buy a radio. It really snowballs. But in terms of the examples of where we go, I guess it's more the question that people are solving very, very difficult problems in very, very difficult environments. We're investing in Ukraine, we're investing in Myanmar, we're investing in South Sudan. These are places where the cards are really stacked against the investors. But on the other hand, you have to realize that sometimes perception of risk is very different. If I asked any of you who wants to buy a single-family home outside of Johannesburg, you wouldn't know the first thing about it. Likewise, someone in Johannesburg wouldn't know how to buy a single-family home in Haley, but they wouldn't know how to buy that in Johannesburg. And it's just a perception of risk. You're not going to go to Johannesburg because you just sounds incredibly risky. But you do know what it's like to buy a single-family home here in Haley. And so what I think we need to sort of recognize is that when you have an asymmetric view of risk, because you're local, you know what's going to work here, take advantage of that. And investors would and should see that as an opportunity. And that's basically what we're doing around the world. We're showing investors who may have a CNN view of emerging markets, which is not always pretty, that actually there are local people in these local environments, as difficult as they may be, that have a asymmetric view of risk, are willing to put some money to work and make a difference with the view that it can be successful.
Joe, we've heard a little bit about energy.
Yes.
Speak a little bit from the corporate perspective in terms of what you're doing, and then go on to
Okay, sure.
Marco.
I don't know if this is on. Is it? Okay. First thing I need to do is establish my street cred and tell you who I am and why I'm here. And I'm going to relate it to two people who are indeed high-value, innovative thinkers, high-quality people who get things done. And they're Julie Wrigley and David Crane, CEO of NRG. I met Julie 30 years ago on a not-for-profit board in Chicago, where she was the chair and I was the humble finance guy, Chicago City Ballet. And she did a hell of a job with that. She's also the person, when I came back from a trip to Aspen and complained about it, She said, stop complaining, just come to Sun Valley where I have a house. And I give her that credential all the time, and I can't thank her enough. You've changed my life in that way. I'll mention recently when, about 6 months ago, we were having lunch, and I said, Julie, I'm doing this NRG yield thing, which is more financial engineering, but totally renewable and clean energy. And I said, why can't we do something like that in this valley? This valley is small enough. Some earlier slide said optimal size. We can make it happen. We can get greener here. We can focus on the valley and the quality of life. And I mentioned food, an interest in mine for hungry people. And she said, Joe, you got to meet Amy Christensen. Well, thank you again for that. Let me flash back. My career is almost 45 years in energy and finance and large global corporations. And I was fortunate enough in my career to rise from a humble financial analyst to a president of a major operating company globally, move into the financial sector, and in 2003, after Sarbanes-Oxley came along, which was government legislation to restore investor confidence in the stock market because there were crooked CFOs, there were crooked CEOs, there were non-independent boards of directors. I found myself, with all those former corporate qualifications, to be invited to serve on corporate boards. So I was able to go the full route. And in 2003, I was asked to serve on the board of directors of an emerging from bankruptcy company called NRG Energy. And with a career in energy, exploration and production and midstream, pumping crude oil and gasoline and gathering natural gas, generation was viewed as a dumb side of the business. They just burn coal and not very innovative. But let me make a distinction. What NRG Energy is, since it emerged from bankruptcy, it's what's called a merchant power producer, which means it's not a rate-based utility. We have certain parts of the business that are smaller that are minor rate-based. Rate-based means a utility builds a power plant. The PUC, Public Utility Commission, says, okay, you build the power plant, you overran it, gee, that's too bad, but we will then let you charge a rate that gets you a guaranteed rate of return. And then when you expand that plant, we can give you an increase on that. So the net of it is to go to work for a utility, I hope there aren't any utility people in the room, it doesn't attract people with an entrepreneurial spirit. So when the NRG Energy Board came together, the chairman of the board, who is still the chairman after 12 years, a wonderful fellow, came from the utility side. I came from the non-utility energy side with a heavy finance background. And David Crane comes along, Princeton undergraduate, Harvard Law School, went to work for Lehman as an investment banker negotiating power purchase agreements. Power purchase agreements exist between a company like NRG that owns the power plant, makes the energy, but sells it under a long-term contract to a utility, the people that used to just cram it down our throat of how you pay for your electricity. At our first board meeting, David Crane takes great pains to point out to the entire board that we're not going to be like dumb utility guys. And the chairman is sitting next to him, who's a utility guy. And I'm thinking, he must have a hell of a contract. This is what we call a career-limiting move. But it's been very successful. He is David Crane, who can't be here because of a conflict. Amy knows very, very well. And Brooks, up your alley here, I had a call scheduled with him this past week. Actually, I just called him and said, I wanted to talk. And the message came back from his assistant, well, he's on the plane back from Mali, but he'll call you on the way home from the airport. And I went, no, it's not that important. It's a very, very incredibly innovative company. And I wanted to focus my remarks on how do you attract capital in this business? Because the capital needs are huge. As we are a merchant power producer and we get into the solar and the renewable energy things because it's good business. The caliber of the executives at the company are like Steve McBee. There aren't any clunkers on the team. If they come in, they don't last. Very aggressive, very innovative. So we start to do all the right stuff with energy, and I'm one of the founding directors of the company, so I get to look at all the things and question them as a director gets to do. And we then, with the financial engineering background that I have, and I'll try not to talk like an MBA in corporate finance, which I am, we start to look at these contracts and these green assets. And 5 years ago, we're thinking, we could launch a green IPO energy company. And the markets were disruptive, so we didn't do that. About 3 years ago, we start to look at what are called MLPs, Master Limited Partnerships, which I have direct experience in that as well. And they are where you take contracted, steady cash flow assets You put them into a partnership, which the parent still owns a piece, and you then sell that into the marketplace, ownership in that. And because of those very, very steady cash flows, no development risk. They're not, assets don't go into an MLP until they're secure, they're moving oil under long-term contracts. They're able to pay off a high distribution level. Investors love them. And they especially love them in stock markets like this, where you have very, very low yields, bond rates very low, debt rates very low. So at NRG, with tremendous qualified CFO, CEO David, myself with my background, we start to look at, couldn't we create a way to take assets within the company that are solid cash flow, long-term, and bundle those? And we then launched something we called YieldCo, which was actually the name in the legal agreements as you're forming it. And we were the first. Almost 2 years ago to the day today, we launched a company with 2.5 megawatts. It's now 5.3. But more importantly, in terms of the size of the company, we're now a $9 billion company in 2 years, having grown from $3 billion 2 years ago. How did we do that? The contracted assets that are in NRG Yield have an average contract life of 17 years with investment-grade utilities. That's pretty good to be able to sell that cash flow off. And do you think the stock market likes that, or the credit markets? Absolutely. We've accessed the public credit markets. We've sold equity. We came out and we split just recently, but I'll use the old numbers. We came out 2 years ago at 22. Before Janet Yellen and the Fed started to talk about tinkering with interest rates and Greece blew up, our stock was at 55. We did a secondary offering 3.5 times in terms of the growth. The stock has been able to yield a dividend. We've increased every quarter for 2 years, a 33% increase in the dividend rate. And if you don't like a doubling in the stock price enough, which it is now, it's slipped back, but it's double what it was 2 years ago. We've stated publicly that the annual increase in the dividend will be 15 to 18%. Investors love it. All that's the story to how do we attract capital to make acquisitions and continue to feed the pipeline. We buy assets from the parent in a related party transaction. I'm the lead independent director, which means we have an arm's length negotiation to buy high quality contracted assets that are renewable and clean, gas plants, wind, solar, thermal. I think we just closed in the last week buying 1/4 of the largest utility scale solar asset in the country called Desert Sunlight. We bought significant ownership interest in the largest wind farm in North America within the last year. So we don't take development risk, we buy contracted assets. And we're able to buy contracted assets because we have that history, we have the high quality people, execution risk. We can do it, and that then translates to being able to buy these things, all these multiple assets. It's also enabled us, with that history of this, to be innovative. We bought some fuel cell technology assets recently. We are looking internationally. And since we were number one, there are now something like 12 or 14 copycat YieldCos that have come out. And I still think that we are the best of them, and that's evidenced by the fact that the stock price performance, the ability to attract capital, when we have a visionary CEO like David Gray, and team people like Steve McBee. And I'm a part-timer. It's great to be a director.
And I guess you're also taking advantage of tax credits associated with being an MLP, right?
Absolutely.
You're taking advantage of.
The other thing we've done, in addition to accessing the public markets for capital, 2 other things have happened because our growth has been so phenomenal. The parent, in just the last year, made a commitment to inject $250 million of equity into us to grow the business. That gives us the capability to get debt on top of that, 3 to 4 to 1. You've just now created $1 billion shoebox full of capital. And also, because of all these tax incentives that are there, where the parent doesn't need them, we've attracted and used what's called tax equity financing, where we'll enter into an agreement with a major financial institution, a bank. They'll get the tax credits, we'll distribute and share the cash flow over the years, and that's a marriage made in heaven as well. So back to your point, thank you for the segue. Yeah. Good ideas and successful completion attract capital.
And this is a great American idea that we are exporting through OPIC. I mean, We did $1 billion worth of renewable energy the past 3 years, actually, and a number of those assets will go into yieldcos that are trying to get this launched globally in emerging markets.
So that, yeah, great example of using a good idea, creative financing to generate enough capital to have a big impact. And I think Marco, another clear example of that. I was alluding to some of these other businesses you might not think of. Solar City is a very obvious example of a business that's doing this. A great idea. Mobilized, I believe, over $4 billion in capital for solar energy. Like to hear you talk about that experience.
Sure,
and
sure.
how you did.
Thanks for having me. When Amy called me and said, I need you to be here, I said, great, because whenever Amy tells me something is going to happen, it's going to be big, and it's going to be great, and it's going to be impactful. Never did I think that I was always going to be remembered from this day on as the guy that Cory Booker almost kissed. so I would have watched myself next time. No, it's great to be, and also I have to get used to the speed limits. Because I missed my flight into Sun Valley. I had to fly into Boise last night. Got a car at 10:30 at night, and I thought, oh, this is going to take forever. Got on the freeway, and it says 80 miles per hour. So I set the cruise control at 90. And as I'm rolling into the town here, I realized that I was no longer in the same speed limit, and I get pulled over by a wonderful police officer. And he says, "Sir, you were speeding." And I said, "Was I?" He goes, "Yes, you were going 32 miles per hour." I said, phew. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, boy, you should have seen how fast I was driving 30 minutes ago. So, but this is my first time here. It's fantastic. I've been here a grand total of about 11 hours so far, I think, and I'm certain that this is not going to be the last time. I work for Solar City. We are a $6 billion market cap company. We celebrated our 9-year anniversary last week, and we, in those 9 years, installed and provided our customers with clean, cheaper energy for a grand total of 1 gigawatt, and that took 9 years. This year alone, we'll do another gigawatt, so we will double that this year. We're installing a system every 3 minutes. And we're really seeing the inflection point where we're getting to critical mass, where this inevitable transition that we know is going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, but it is happening. It's happening with leadership like yourselves and what Amy is pulling together, and it's creating this awareness out there. Guys, this is actually possible. You can buy clean, better power at a lower price, and it's for you, and you can fix it for 20 years, and the utility is not going to tell you next year, hey, sorry, we had a bad year, we're going to raise rates 5%. No, energy independence, and I'll shout out back to my buddy Steve McBee at NRG, and yourselves as well, is we absolutely believe that energy independence, resilience, all of that is making your own power, storing it whenever you don't need it, being able to use it whenever you want to, and sell it to whoever the hell you want. I mean, that is American, right? That is American. And so we're at this point where we're at an inflection point where that actually is economically possible. We are now in 19 states where 41 million people are paying more expensive power, and it's definitely dirtier. And we're coming to them and say, hey, we're Solar City, we got a really cool chairman, Elon Musk. and oh, by the way, we've done something for 9 years that also works for you. You can buy clean power at a lower price and fixed, and we'll never change that price on you. And that's great. So that's happening. So I wanted to, as I've learned, and I took some notes today, and I listened to, and I'll try to cram everything in the remaining 4.5 minutes. And Cory Booker said I like statistics. I like them too. I'm a recovering banker. I was in banking for 20 years. And so, if I look at this community, 40% of your power is coal and 60% is hydro, right? And when I think about hydro, I think about Brazil. I think about what almost happened in Sao Paulo when the rivers dried up. And that entire city is dependent on hydro. And they were in complete crisis mode. Oh, we've always had hydro, the Amazon is flowing, everything is great. Well, climate change is causing extreme weather. And that extreme weather is making that hydro less predictable. So if you're dependent, as you are, as much on hydro as you are, that is probably not as resilient as you need to be for the years ahead. So diversify your energy mix. And coal, we all know, and people made some remarks today about, well, we don't want to be too environmentalist. Well, I love my planet. I love my kids. I do love my community. I live in California. I want the air to be clean. I want to reduce the amount of premature deaths every year on this planet. That is 5 million people die every year from air pollution. Every year, premature. And 20% of those people are less than the age of 5. I don't want that. I do want coal to go away. Now, I do want to replace it with something that's better, cleaner, better, cheaper. And so we do want to be realistic too. We have a big infrastructure that we need to phase out over time, right? And I don't expect some of the other companies that didn't have the luxury that we had. We started out clean. We said we're going to be 100% renewable forever, right? And at 9 years ago, that was a crazy vision, and today that's becoming a reality. There are others that have the right vision that still have another mix. Energy is one of them, and I know where David stands, and I know that he feels the same way we feel. But he needs to phase that out over time, right? So I think there's a way to create policy to allow for a transition, but that transition needs to happen. And it needs to happen fast because we're in trouble. So let me share some statistics with you in terms of what we're doing and what I see. So 50% of the new electricity capacity generation that was built in all of the United States in the last 3 years, so 2013, 14, and the year-to-date 15, more than 50% of that is actually renewable. It's not fossil fuel. So fossil fuel is actually the alternative energy now. Fossil fuel is the alternative energy as you measure it by new energy electricity generation production, right? So one thing I want to leave you with is fossil fuel is the alternative energy. Number two is the, and what's causing these renewables to pick up? Is it because everyone feels the same way I feel? We care so much about the planet? Not necessarily. A lot of people are saying, wait a minute, in our core markets, where we are right now, 19 states, these 41 million people that live there have seen their cost of energy go up by 47% since 2002. That's horrible. Think about subsidies. You're subsidizing fossil fuel. That's a horrible return for the taxpayer, right? You're subsidizing something that becomes increasingly more expensive over time. That's bad. That's not good. That's not good policy either. You subsidize solar, and the cost has dropped 50% of the last 5 years, 90% of the last 10 years. Great return for the taxpayer. So utility costs continue to rise, and even though natural gas is very cheap, when you bring it down to someone's home, and you go through transmission and distribution, and those 50 million wooden poles that it has to go through, I'm stealing that from David because he makes that reference all the time, and I love it. But by the time it gets to someone's home, that power continues to increase. I live in California. PG&E raised our rates 5% last year, and we used to be powerless. Now we're not. Okay, so our costs are dropping. Utility rates continue to increase steadily, at least at or above the rate of inflation, and we're giving customers the ability to basically say, here's something cheaper, and you can lock it in forever. Okay, so how do we do that? How did it get so cheap, right? So it's about critical mass, technology. I mean, I have the luxury of having been a pilot customer for everything. I have solar, I have a battery in my home. When the power goes out, the entire home switches off the grid onto my battery that keeps being replenished with solar. It's really awesome. And 2 years ago, that was expensive. Today, those costs are 50% less. So I can tell you that our sister company, Tesla, and and I think a public reference has been made, and if not, please, everyone forgive me, but the battery cost has dropped. The one that I have in my garage is now 50% cheaper than it was a year and a half ago. And we're building a gigawatt factory in Nevada. We will be producing more batteries I can't share the details, but it's going to blow people's minds. So we're on this trajectory that this reality is here, and it's there, and it's going to be there for you. So costs are coming down, as you can see, and we're looking at a residential, dollars per watt install by 2017 of $2.50 a watt, which makes this extremely competitive, okay, against any fossil fuel in many of the U.S. states. So we're looking at having 1 million customers by the end of 2017. Next slide, please. And that's, you can see our growth rate is just mathematically, you can see continues to accelerate at an increasing growth rate Our addressable market today is 41 million. That will be significantly higher as the costs come down over time. Next slide, please. Those 43 million existing people spend $60 billion a year in more expensive electric costs. So you can imagine what the magnitude is of the opportunity for us and NRG. Next slide, please. I told you about how we're installing solar now every 3 minutes. Last year, President Obama at the State of the Union said that the entire industry was installing residential solar every 3 minutes. We alone now are installing solar every 3 minutes. I'm going to throw a bunch of statistics at you really fast in the remaining 6 slides. We created 12,000 jobs since we were founded 9 years ago. Last month alone, we hired 1,000 people just to keep up with the growth. So this is happening. We're installing a gigawatt this year. That's at a cost of about $2.90 a watt. So we're raising, $2.9 billion this year. Most of that actually we've already raised, so it's going very well. If you extrapolate it, we're raising more than $1 million an hour. So due to the day that we're here, I've raised $10 million. So, and Jennifer is going to be a great investor in that. So we're in good hands. But and in the next 5 years, just the magnitude and also the capital investment opportunity, which is where I'm going to close, is in the next 5 years, we're looking at 32 gigawatts, right? Just extrapolating our growth rate using basic mathematics. So that's 32 gigawatts at an average install cost of about $2.50 a watt. We need, next slide, $75 billion of capital. And $75 billion of capital may seem like a lot of money, but it's only 0.3% of the entire retirement assets under management in the United States. So this revolution will take only 0.3% of the entire assets that are under management, $23 trillion in the United States, IRAs, pension funds, what have you. And it doesn't even include some of the foundations and the money that's being managed that's looking for impact, that's saying, hey, we want to divest, and where do we invest? Well, we've got it. So, and what does it look like? This is the last slide. So, what is in the 9 years, have we paid our banks back? Well, I used to be an early SolarCity banker. That's why I got quite comfortable with the business model over time. No one's ever lost a penny. I mean, and it's very logical. Our default rates are well below any other asset class where consumers borrow, whether it's for car loans or mortgages. Why? They don't have an economic incentive to default. Other than it hits their FICO score, they don't have an economic incentive to default. If they stop paying us, then we turn off the solar and they go back to the utility paying more for dirty power. So would you like to continue to pay less for cheap power, for clean power, or you'd like to go back to paying more for dirty power? They really don't have an economic incentive to default. And that's what we've been able to prove through our relationships with the credit rating agencies. We were the first ones to issue investment grade BBB plus bonds. We'll be in the market soon again. I think people will be very impressed, and this is an investment grade asset class that has actually high yield equivalent returns. In terms of alpha, there is no more alpha than in the solar industry. If you're buying fixed income, or even on the equity side through yield costs, but if you're buying just basic fixed income, we're providing investment grade returns that are easily 250 basis points over the yield curve, over the treasury curves. For something that's investment grade, that should really be priced below 100 basis points. So this is the time to open your wallet and to come in, because this is not going to be around forever, because the market will become more intelligent and will price it where it should be priced. So the last slide really is just these statistics. Is like, guys, there's why do we do this? We don't need premature deaths from air pollution. It's completely unnecessary. Technology is here. We can replace our fossil fuel infrastructure to 100% renewable energy by 2050. That's what we believe. And it's a major job creation. That transition alone will create 2 million net new jobs. And it provides for energy security, which I think is something that's really important to this region as well. So thank you for having me on this panel.
And Marco, my understanding, those solar bond, I mean, you are linking those directly to the consumer in the sense that the consumer can go to your website and get a better return. I mean, obviously, you've got to pay attention to the risk profile, and do your due diligence, as Marco alluded to, in terms of limited risk profile. But it's a better return than a lot of other products that are out there in terms of
Absolutely,
cash.
and we're actually in the process of evaluating an issuance that's very short term, that you could roll over, for instance, maybe every 3 months. View it like as an alternative to a CD. You just get paid 5 times more.
Right. So, the key takeaway here is, and I think, I was having a conversation earlier in the back, that the economics are here. Now, it does vary state by state, and that's what we're going to get into next in terms of the role of nonprofit or impact investing or either you fight it through policy, which is work that we've been doing, Amy's been doing in terms of the stuff that's going on with the PUC, but also when the playing field is not necessarily level or skewed in terms of subsidies with, we've been focusing on energy, it's true in a lot of other areas as well, where the incentive is towards, typical infrastructure, coal, versus, there is a need for impact capital to come in and
My turn.
talk about that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rosalie Sheehy-Cates, and it's my great pleasure to represent Philanthropy Northwest here today, and to be with all these smart people and all of you. It's quite amazing. My view of Idaho prior to this has been Coeur d'Alene. I live in Missoula, and I'm not laughing at Coeur d'Alene. And communities like Kamia and forest-dependent communities. So it's another view of an incredible state. And thank you very much for the invitation and for all of your wisdom. I mean, what an honor to be speaking with you. So, Philanthropy Northwest is kind of a learning, thinking, and doing network of both foundations and individual philanthropists in eight states, 7 states, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana. I probably missed one. We're not Hawaii. And I guess I'm fully empowered today to kind of blow up the business model of philanthropy. So that's what I'm going to try to do, is kind of turn the conversation a little bit to why would you invest? Why would you do something different and take an investment viewpoint with your endowment as a foundation? And maybe the mirror case would be if you're an individual investor with a philanthropy, sideline, maybe kind of blow up the boundary between those two and think about how these things merge. So, love Cory Booker. He just gave us so much to think about. I turned to my friend and said, "That's funny, I kind of wanted to kiss him too."
Cory.
Well, we won't go into that. I'm going to try to make you blush while we're up here. So. But I love that analogy about judo. So are we working with the system, or are we working against it when we have an endowment and an investment side of our lives or our foundation, and then the philanthropy side? So let's just talk about foundations first. And we'll try to do, this is for you, Jeff. Are you still there? We're going to do some disruptive business model stuff here. So what's the business model for a foundation? It's a warehouse for money. It's a tax-advantaged pile of money. I'm not sure if this is accurate, but I've been kind of thinking that pile of money is actually kind of subtracted from the working capital of the country, because you just put it aside into what in Spain we might call a torre de oro, a golden tower where we store it, and Wall Street has access to it. 95% needs to be, let me just say this, of the rule for having a foundation is that you park this money in a tax-advantaged pile, and you give away 5% of it every year. 95% of it, the only entity that has access to it is Wall Street. Now, I am not knocking that model. It has let me do all the work I have ever done in my whole life. So I actually love foundations. But it is kind of a weird model, isn't it? And I think what's happened is that I'm going to try to put a picture in your head of the foundation, the pile of money, the model of investing it in Wall Street. So think of Wall Street or the market as kind of some gears up here. So we put it up there to make the money to come back down into the foundation, and we give 5% away to the community that's over here to do all the good things that we want to do, whether it's arts or environmental or all the good work that is so clear right here in Sun Valley. And I think what's happened for a lot of foundations is they've realized we like those gears, they're turning there, they're returning the money to the foundation, but suddenly we see a new cog. And this is the cog that the market itself is turning in the communities that we're helping. And then we're wondering, are we doing judo or not? Is the market turning some big wheels that are actually making us do the grant making that we're doing? We don't know. It seems like maybe. And then we're thinking, well, actually my philanthropic process may have to work throughout the process, both the money I'm giving away at the community level and in the market itself, because suddenly now we're looking under the hood and we're seeing what our investments are doing. Now, up here today, it's just incredible to see institution-grade investments that I'm kind of surprised you didn't all run for the door and call your wealth advisors. Buy me Solar City, right now, buy me Cleanco. Because now we're seeing there's starting to be quite a lot of possibilities for investing across the asset classes, and I think Jennifer's going to talk a lot more about that. So now suddenly we can say, wow, maybe this isn't so separate, what we do with the endowment and what we do with our grant making. Maybe what we do with our endowment may having impacts on the communities that we're serving. So now, darn it, we actually have to pay attention to that and think about how we invest that money. And then B, how can I proactively think about my investing as a way to have huge impact on those communities that I work in? So that's actually my entire job here today, is to just challenge the business model a little bit and give you a case for adopting an investment mentality that coincides with your philanthropy. I'll just stop it there. Thank you.
Thank you. You alluded to Jennifer, and I think Jennifer's role in terms of working with private wealth, family offices, who I think are starting to come around to that way of thinking. Maybe you could talk about that as to how that's being done, what's working, what's not.
Sure. So thank you, everybody, for having us today. Just to give you a little overview of the Caprock Group, we are a multifamily office with 5 offices in the Western U.S. And we have an impact practice where we are deploying capital with an impact mandate for about 1/3 of our total assets under advisement. So it's a very important driver strategically for our firm at the moment. And to build a little bit on Senator Booker's comments earlier, when he was talking about approaching problems and situations and looking for win-win solutions for all stakeholders, that's essentially what we're trying to do in the impact practice. So to look at that through the resiliency framework, we would define win-win as an investment that is offering resiliency, but it's also providing a competitive return to investors. So really, it is the ability to both be creating a positive change, but also to be earning a return commensurate with what you could get in your portfolio otherwise. The good news is that the win-win opportunity set is really increasing. We have seen so many new investments coming to market across all asset classes, across all thematic areas and geographies, and so that, from where I sit, has just been extremely exciting. I think one thing I'd like to touch on that Brooks talked about earlier was the mispricing of risk or misperceptions on risk. And this has been a very important piece for us in terms of how we deploy capital, because we've really noticed that out in the market, there still really is a perception amongst the general investing public that a lot of investments that are focused on resiliency or are focused on sustainability really do have this elevated level of risk to them. And what we've found is that that's really not the case. And so because of that, investors are able to earn a higher return on a lot of investments focused on resiliency and sustainability than they otherwise could. So that's been a very interesting piece for us to kind of come away with. In terms of thematic areas, when I think about resiliency and how it impacts a community, we really think about it in sort of the resources bucket and then also the socioeconomic bucket. So if we can just look at those two separately, and I think resources, and when I say resources, I mean infrastructure, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. I think the panel today has clearly illustrated that there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot of new investable options coming to market. I think thematically, it's moving beyond solar. We're seeing a lot now with wastewater management. Biomass is another area that's becoming a big focus for a lot of investors that are interested in investing in sort of a real asset type asset class. In terms of structures, we're also seeing a widening of the structures that people can use to access sustainable or resilient investments. So the public equity markets have been talked about as a way to get access to yieldcos, for example. But you've also got a lot of private investment funds that will then go and invest in a series of projects. And now which we think is most exciting, is investors are often able to directly invest into projects themselves. And they can actually pick where in the capital stack of the project they want to invest. And so that to us has been very exciting because it just illustrates that the market's maturing and it's moving out of sort of a niche area into more of a mainstream source for capital. On the social economic side, we're also seeing a broadening of thematic areas, and we have seen it sort of locally. We're seeing some really interesting things happening in Idaho. I think on the national scale and then internationally, we've seen a lot in emerging markets as well, where you're just seeing new thematic areas focused on healthcare, education, livelihood improvements, and just different structures coming to market that are allowing investors to access new investable areas that they didn't have access to before. So it's just been a very exciting time to be deploying capital in this space.
Yeah, I think, the point you alluded to in terms of a more flexible capital structure. I mean, we all have different views on what's important, on what we value. Be it economic, I just want economic return. I don't care about anything else. Okay, so that's some of us. Some of us, I really care about water. I really care, And so there's a whole spectrum of interest and value that each one of us holds. And so the more flexible that investment spectrum becomes, I think the more opportunity it opens up for all of us. So that development, I think, is a very important component. The other piece, I think, is often forgotten about resilience is we're talking about investment opportunities that make sense today in the current environment. Well, the key, if it's a good resilient investment, is what happens if that environment changes? And in that situation, these investments should be more valuable. So this is kind of a worst case scenario in terms of investing for today, the way things are now, recognizing that it should only get better if things change. So that's another component that I think is forgotten in the risk reward evaluation. Michael, you've written a lot about local investing. Great. One of Michael's great books, he's got many, is Local Dollars, Local Cents. And he talks a lot about ways to mobilize capital, but also the values, the additional benefits of local investing that people might not recognize. And kind of similar to what I was alluding to, that there are a lot of extra benefits. A simple case would be if you're a homeowner in this valley and you invest in something locally, it makes the place more appealing and it drives up the value of your real estate. So that's kind of a strictly financial. Not to say all the other benefits that it brings in terms of quality of life, in terms of a more diverse, neighbor, set of neighbors, what have you. A healthier system in which you're living. But Michael, maybe you could kind of talk about some of those aspects and the capital raising and specifically the importance of that and how you can do it.
Well, I guess my central message is that a resilience revolution requires a local investment revolution. When I was happily invited here 2 years ago for a Blaine County Economic Development Conference, I think the main point that I tried to share with people was that there is overwhelming evidence now that communities with a high density of locally owned businesses have the highest per capita job growth rates and the highest per capita income growth rates. In other words, if you care about eliminating poverty, you want to expand the number and diversity of locally owned businesses. Now, this fits hand in glove with what we're trying to do with resilience, because resilience, part of resilience is self-reliance. To be as self-reliant on as many goods and services as possible. And in small places, self-reliance requires small, locally owned businesses. And the only way these businesses are going to get the capital to grow is by tapping into unconventional markets. Now, a few things about the locally owned business universe. About 60% of the US economy is driven by locally owned businesses, small, medium, home-based businesses. These businesses are highly profitable. That is, if you look at the most recent data from the Department of Commerce, sole proprietorships, which most small businesses are or start out as, are 11 times as profitable as C corporations. We have data from Canada, very good profit data, that shows that their most profitable businesses have 10 to 20 employees, about 60% higher than the companies that are traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange. We have heard lots of evidence shared with us today, just in the food and the energy sectors, that there are factors in the world that are favoring smaller, more self-reliant businesses to bring greater senses of resilience. So, given all these great things about local business, I am sure that every single one of you who has spent all this time at this conference today is investing locally. So let's just put it to the test. By show of hands here, how many people have their banking in a local bank or credit union? Okay, so about half of you. The other half will have a little chat at lunch. How many of you with pension funds, I assume that's most of you, have at least 1% of your money in the 60% of the economy that's locally owned?
How many know real estate?
So this is pretty outrageous. You folks are the problem. You have to start moving your money into the businesses that you know are essential for resilience. Now, there's a reason for this, and the reason is a policy mistake called securities law that was established about 80 years ago that I call investment apartheid. Investment apartheid created two classes of investors. If you're in the top 1% of income earners or wealth holders, you're allowed to invest in anything, anytime, no questions asked. If you're in the other group, you can only put a penny into a local business if your lawyer has done $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 worth of disclosure work. And nearly all local businesses have said with that proposition, forget about it. We're not going to bother going down that route. Now, the good news is this is changing, and it is changing radically. In 2009, I wrote a piece for the Federal Reserve in San Francisco arguing a little bit mischievously that we ought to have a $100 lawyer-free zone. That is, that any person should be able to write a $100 check to any company without any lawyers whatsoever. This actually garnered hundreds of petitions and a rulemaking proposal to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which they did absolutely nothing about. Congress then started to pay attention to these many proposals for crowdfunding and passed what was called the Jobs Act, which basically creates not a $100 exemption, but a $2,000 exemption. Now, it's not quite a lawyer-free zone, and the bigger news about the Jobs Act is that the SEC was supposed to promulgate regulations on this in December in 2012, and here we are in July of 2015 and still waiting. The SEC has effectively tried to destroy the Jobs Act. Now, there's something remarkable that's happened, though. Half of the US states have said, you know what? We're not waiting for the federal government. We're going to pass our own version of the Jobs Act and make it cheaper for unaccredited investors to put money into local business. One of those states is Idaho. Another one of those states is Maryland, where I live. And in Maryland, we passed a bill last year that created a $100 exemption. And any company can now borrow $100,000 from other Maryland residents with virtually no legal paperwork. Now, these kinds of revolutionary acts, I think, are going to totally tip the balance in favor of small, local, resilient businesses. But I do want to say that it's not just enough to change the policy environment. Now, it's easy to change the policy environment. In Maryland, you know, even though we're sort of a blue state, we just elected a Republican governor. We have a lot of Republicans in the state legislature, and the state legislature unanimously approved our reforms. Unanimously. And that's true in most of the debates over securities reform around the country. But the securities reforms just sit there as sort of dead letter. And we need organizations that actually pick up these legal changes and run with them. So I put to you the example of Oregon, a woman named Amy Pearl, who runs something called the Oregon Hatch. It's a innovation and incubation center in Portland. But she has personally created a web apparatus connecting local investors and local businesses to take advantage of the Oregon securities reforms that she helped to push. And that's one of the things that I hope that the Institute here begins to take on, not just in Idaho, but in other states as well. Let me say finally that the local investment revolution is not just about making the issuance of securities cheaper and easier. We have to make the trading of securities cheaper and easier through local stock exchanges. We have to make the pooling of local securities cheaper and easier through reform of investment company acts. We have to make the pension fund rules that allow pension funds to potentially put money into local businesses, we have to make those easier. So there's many, many steps that lie ahead. But I have to say that so much exciting stuff has occurred just in the last 3 years that you folks and this institute could really turn around public policy. I really feel, I mean, we're not just at an inflection point. We are at the point where there's going to be the single biggest shift of capital from Wall Street to Main Street that the world has ever seen. Good luck with it.
How hungry are people? You know, I always like to. Are there any desperate questions?
One desperate question.
Personally, I think questions way outweigh food. So if anyone wants to ask questions.
I agree. Question for Marco then. Let's connect with Michael right next to you. Are you guys going to offer a way to invest?
I am going to kiss him first.
Offer us a way to invest in Solar City in these investments locally, so that you can limit regionally, Idaho, or even local. So I know my investment's going to help solarize here.
I mean, the penny definitely just dropped. You know, you can go to solarcity.com right now and buy our solar bonds directly without the intermediary need of a broker or anything. So that you can do. But we have not yet specifically linked it to a project. And so you got my wheels turning. You got my wheels turning big time. I think the idea of, you know, a community solar project, because not everyone can have solar on their home, and then connecting that to the community itself as also an investment opportunity, and then linking that back to the credit risk of the community itself. So you're investing in your own credit risk of the community. That's really, really interesting. So our head of financial products is Tim Newell. I'll be talking to him on Monday, and we'll think about it.
That's great. That's great news. I did just want to add before we go to lunch that we have been working to develop a community solar project that all of you would be available to invest in. It's on hold right now because of that Public Utilities Commission battle we've mentioned here and there, but we trust that working with Idaho Power and with our regulators, we'll be able to find a way forward for community solar in our community. Everybody from individuals to Aspen Skiing Company who's building that hotel can't seem to be able to fit solar on their roof, and they want to invest in community solar. So we have a lot of people who are hungry to invest in it. So we're going to make it happen one way or other, and look forward to working with all of you to do so. So on that note, do you want to close?
I just want to say one thing too. I mean, that also is what provides opportunity for institutions like ourselves. I mean, to try to try to do that in the meantime. This is not about competition; it's about enabling it. And Solar City is doing great work. There's opportunities and niches for us to take on ourselves as a community. And so that, what I should have highlighted at the beginning, I was talking about, the first session of getting buy-in as to what we're doing and what resilience is about and the importance of it. Well, the next thing is investing, and that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where you can actually do things, build things, make things. And that's what this is about. So, I mean, that's the second key aspect of what we would like to do in terms of the Institute. And to do that, we need your support.
Okay, final pitch. So this afternoon's first panel is all about strategies for resilience and really going to get into our local opportunities. And that last panel is specific local investment opportunities. We're already ginning up, working with our nonprofit partners like the YMCA, working with companies in this valley like Webb Landscaping. There's some really innovative structures that we're able to come up with that have attractive returns and are right here in our valley. So we hope you'll be here for the afternoon as well. But in the meantime, we should probably let you go get lunch. So should we close with that? And thank you to the panel.